Hi everybody. Welcome to our there we go. Welcome to our final lesson in Unit 7, Cognition. I'm Mrs. Sarah Ryan and this is AP Psychology from my classroom today. In today's topic, we are moving away from our memory that we've been talking about in our past few videos for Unit 7 and looking at another really big element of cognition, and that of course is thinking and problem solving. And so today we're going to look at some of the common ways that we as humans are going to think about this information that we get presented with all of the time. So first of all, we actually start with a cognition/developmental concept, and the word is actually concepts. So a concept is talking about how do we mentally group things together. And this is an element of development because little kids, this is one of their major cognitive tasks that they are going to be asked to deal with all the time. And in developmental terms, we refer to this as a schema. In cognition terms, we talk about this as a concept, and essentially they're going to be the same thing. And it's talking about how do we classify, how do we group information for it to kind of all fit together. Classic examples of this would be like showing people a picture of an office and then asking them to recall things that they saw in that office. And very frequently, people will recall seeing things that actually weren't there. But the things that they recall seeing are things that would be typical of like an office setting. For example, they might say things like they remember seeing a stapler, or they remember seeing, not that the lights go off all the time. That's one of those happy things that happens in my classroom. No, they remember seeing like a stapler, or they remember seeing a jar of pencils, like they remember seeing books, like things that you might associate with an office setting that we recall seeing those things. And the reason for that is because it's part of that concept, it's part of that mental grouping, it's part of that schema. And so while we go through and we file away all of these experiences that we have in these different categories, right, like this is also why it could be so unnerving to see your teachers not at school, right? Like when I run into students at the grocery store or at a restaurant, like, oh, it's so weird, like Mrs. Ryan's supposed to live in her classroom kind of a deal. And it's because I fit in your school concept, right? I don't fit in the like going to the grocery store concepts or that kind of a thing. And so that's part of concept formation. So one of the elements to concept formation is that we develop what's known as prototypes. And when we talk about prototype, a lot of times like from an engineering standpoint, it's like the first one, like the first thing that's built. Here, prototype is saying it's my best example from a particular category. And so it's like, it's the epitome of whatever this category might be. And one of the things that I do in my classroom is I'll ask students to think of a bird, okay? And I'll have them mentally think for a moment about a bird. And a lot of students will talk about a bird like this bird right here. They're gonna talk about like a robin, or they might say a blue jay. They might say a hawk, okay? But the bird that many students imagine when I just initially ask, think of a bird, it's something that's small, it has feathers, it has wings, it flies, okay? It's usually in like the brownish scheme of colors because that's what we have a lot of in Northwest Ohio, like, bird, that's what we think of. Not a lot of people think of a peacock. One year I had a girl say swan, and that made a lot of sense because that was her last name. Not a lot of people saying penguins. Not a lot of people saying ostriches, and why? Why is it that like that's not the bird that you think of when I ask you to think of a bird? And it's because it doesn't it's not as bird-like, right? It's when I ask for a bird, you think of the birdiest bird, right, that would come to mind, and that's a prototype. And so our prototypes actually play a big role in, like, when we're trying to imagine something new or something different. You know, if it's so drastically different from a prototype, a mental, you know, image that we have in our mind, then, you know, we might be a little hesitant about an idea because it's so very different from our concepts that, you know, fall in line with that category. So we also have to deal with a whole lot of problem solving, and that as humans we try to solve problems as quickly as possible. And when we're doing this, we're often going to try what's known as a heuristic. And a heuristic is a trial and error where I try something out, I see if it works. If it doesn't, boom, I go on to something else. And that I do this in an attempt to find what is going to work. Okay, and that is a heuristic. Its opposite is actually known as an algorithm. And some of you might have heard of algorithms. You talked about, like, in your mathematics classes or like in computer coding, you know, finding an algorithm, that kind of a thing. An algorithm is a method or a rule, or what we think of as a methodical step-by-step procedure. And the kicker with an algorithm is that every single possibility is tried, because algorithms guarantee that I will find the right answer, or I will find whatever the solution is that I'm looking for, because every single possibility is tried. Now, algorithms take a really long time to do. Okay, like if I'm a human being, step-by-step methodical procedure, that's going to take a while. But I guarantee that I'm going to find the answer because every single thing is tried. Whereas a heuristic, trial and error, we say it's more error prone because I'm not guaranteed that I'm going to find the right answer because I'm just, you know, willy-nilly trying things. So the example that I have, okay, so here is my example of differences between an algorithm and a heuristic. So I have many wonderful qualities, and cooking is not one of them. I say that just because it's true. It's just not my thing. But every once in a while, I like to try out a new recipe, and I came across a recipe that used the crock pot, which I absolutely love because there's very little that can go wrong with a crock pot. And it was to make some ribs, which is something my husband really likes. And so this recipe called for an ingredient that I was not familiar with and I had never heard of before, and that was called liquid smoke, which is where my picture here comes from. So I'm at the grocery store, which my grocery store of choice is Meijer, and I'm very familiar with Meijer. I've been shopping there my entire life. I know where everything is, and I got really upset when they did a whole redesign because they moved all my shelves around. But anyways, so I'm in the store and I have to find this product that I don't know where it is. So that's my problem, right? So now if I were going to do an algorithm, what would have to happen is that I would have to go up and down every single aisle in the store, looking at every single product available, because eventually I would find liquid smoke. Right? Eventually it would be there because I know that the store carries this product. I'm not going to ask for help. Silly. But that would be following an algorithm. It would be a step-by-step methodical procedure, up and down every aisle, looking at every shelf, looking at every product. Eventually I would find what it is that I'm looking for. But that's time consuming. And so instead, utilize a heuristic. Utilizing a heuristic, meaning trial and error, I'm going to get rid of the things that I know aren't going to work. So I'm not going to look in anything that's, non-grocery related. And then there's certain aisles that I can initially eliminate. I know that this isn't a paper product. I know it's not something that's probably in the dairy aisle. It doesn't have anything to do with fruits and vegetables, so I'm not going to look there either, or like breakfast cereals. So the first place that I go is I go to where the spices are, because I know that this is something that, I'm using it as like a flavoring. So I think spices in my mind. And so that's the first aisle that I go to. And that actually is not where you find liquid smoke. As I went up and down that aisle looking at all the different kinds of spices and things like that, and this isn't where it was going to be. So now I'm kind of stuck, and I called my mom, and she didn't answer. And still don't want to ask anybody in the store. So now I have to find another aisle where this might potentially be. And lo and behold, it's actually in the sauces aisle. It's near barbecue sauce, just in case you ever wondered. But see, I had to do a trial and error. Like there were some aisles that I tried that were incorrect, okay? But it was still way faster than using an algorithm, because in an algorithm I have to go through every single trial. And so heuristics and algorithms are different ways that I might approach my problem solving. Now, one of the big obstacles that we come up against in our problem solving is that we want to be right. Like that's just something that as humans we are not super humble creatures. We don't like being wrong about stuff. And because we want to be right, we almost invariably seek out information that confirms what it is that we already believe, or what it is that we already think about something. And we know this is confirmation bias. And confirmation bias can lead us astray all the time. Because if I develop an incorrect idea about something, then I will inevitably look at information that continues to support my incorrect idea, even though it's incorrect. And so this desire to want to be correct actually leads me down a path to being more and more incorrect as it goes on, because I like to confirm my own beliefs. And so this is a confirmation bias. Confirmation bias can also lead me to another fun problem, and that's known as fixation. And in fixation, this is where I can't solve my problem, and I'm really, really stuck, and I need a fresh perspective. And this is where, like, if you've ever lost something in your house, and you swear up and down that you look in every single room, and then finally you break down and you ask like your mom or dad to help you find something, and like boom, as though there's some kind of parenting magic that they knew exactly where it was. It's probably more about fixation, where you were getting fixated on like, it needs to be in this room, it has to be there, like this is where I think it would be. And then this other person comes in with a fresh perspective, and boom, can think of it as something totally different that you wouldn't have considered. And then, hey, there's the correct answer, right? There's my problem being solved. There's actually a type of fixation that we do, which is known as mental set, where I think about like, how did I solve this problem in the past? And I go back and I try to solve my new problem using things that worked in the past. And it's not always successful, right? Like what worked at one point in time doesn't mean that it's always going to work. Like new problems require new solutions, and we don't think like that. We get stuck. We get this mental set. We're like, well, this is what worked last time. It's obviously going to. No, it's not obviously going to work this time. That is a way that we interfere with taking kind of this fresh approach to the problems that we encounter. One of my favorite concepts in all of this is something known as functional fixedness. So functional fixedness is where I see objects, like tools especially, I see them as unchanging. Like the tool is what it is, and I can't see it as anything else besides what that tool might be. And what can happen is that if I suffer from functional fixedness, I might not be able to use creativity to think about how something might be used differently, in what we refer to as divergent versus convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is something like this right here. This is a rake. Hopefully it's clean, right? But if you find yourself in a campfire situation and you want to make s'mores, and lo and behold, there's nothing that you can use to cook your s'mores with, but you have this rake. If you see a rake as only being a tool for picking up leaves, you are experiencing functional fixedness. Whereas this person clearly thought of a rake as a way to toast marshmallows, as well as it looks like there's some peanut butter cups on there. Like, that's taking a tool and using it not for its intended purpose, but potentially for something that could be really great. And so functional fixedness, I see objects as only being what, they're designed to be. Divergent thinking is thinking outside of the box. Okay, it's thinking creatively. Convergent thinking is thinking inside of the box. It's not being creative with my thinking, and that these can lead me to my different experiences with fixation. Finally today, we have 2 other heuristics that we need to mention. I don't know why this is in my way. Go away. Thank you. 2 other types of heuristics that we experience, known as the representativeness heuristic and the availability heuristic. So heuristics are mental shortcuts, right? They're mental shortcuts to solving problems using trial and error, but they are error prone. Sometimes they lead me to incorrect answers. And representativeness heuristic and availability heuristic are 2 ways that my thinking, my judgment, can sometimes lead me astray. So representativeness heuristic is where we think about the likelihood of an event based on how well it is part of a particular prototype. So if something fits a particular prototype, we're like, oh, yes, that's, obviously what it would be. I tend to use myself as one of these examples. So, as an adult, that I go out and I might meet people who, I've never met before, and in adult world, when, you greet someone, one of the very first questions that usually comes about is like, what do you do? Like, what is your career? That kind of a thing. And I will, of course, tell people that I am a teacher. And it'll be, hi, my name is Sarah Ryan, I'm a teacher, and that's where the mental judgment starts coming in. Because representativeness heuristic, the problem solving that this person now is mentally doing, what kind of a teacher is she? And guess what kind of teacher a lot of people think that I am? Probably not an AP Psych teacher, right? Because I'll say I'm a teacher. Oh, where do you teach? I teach at Northview High School. You teach high school? Yes, I teach social studies, advanced placement psychology. Oh, really? Why do I get that kind of response? I don't really fit the prototype of what a high school teacher looks like. I look more like in the kindergarten range. And that's fine. I get it. I'm 5'2". I'm blonde. Got kind of peppy things going on here. Like, I'm not really what some people might think of as like a prototype of a high school teacher. And so now that representativeness heuristic, well, that's incorrect because I might have been making that assumption about, what something is based off of my prototypes. Or sometimes we refer to this as like stereotypes, right? That like it's not fitting what I would have expected. Availability heuristic is similar, but there's a very clear difference here. And that my availability heuristic is where I'm making a judgment based on the availability of information. So this is what pops into my mind. This is what is more readily available because I just saw a news story about this. It's something where like I frequently see news stories about this, or this is what I see in memes on the internet. Like, boom, that's what pops in my mind more frequently. And so the information is more available, okay? Because it's more available, I tend to think of those things as being more common. One of my favorite examples of this is I ask students about, what is more deadly, sharks or hot dogs? And like, if you think about the news stories, I just saw one the other day, availability heuristic, of a dude who had like a shark circling around him, and there's like drone footage and stuff like this of it happening at a beach, like, oh yeah, sharks, deadly, gonna get me, that kind of a thing. When in fact, hot dogs, way more likely to kill you, okay? And I'm not just talking like the whole cooking process and like having spoiled meat or something like that, but no, like hot dogs are a super terrible choking hazard. And because of that, way more people die of hot dogs than they do sharks. And yet, what more readily comes to mind, what pops in my mind, is going to be that shark attack. And so that is my availability heuristic. So what is the information that more closely pops into my mind because it's recent, it's something that I just heard, that kind of a thing. Representativeness heuristic is where I'm judging likelihood based on prototypes, based on stereotypes, and that the likelihood of something happening because it fits with what I would have expected to have happen. So that's going to wrap it up for our cognition unit. Until next time, thanks for joining me. Goodbye.